The Souls series has an infinite amount of appeal, and one aspect about it that attracts a lot of attention would be the areas. From majestic castles to sunken cities, From Software have designed some of the best levels that gaming has seen. However, we all know that they don't have a 100% success rate, and that's what this video will focus upon. Last time, we talked about their greatest hits, the best area from each title. However, today we'll be going over the worst area from each game, from Demon Souls all the way to their latest entry, Elden Ring. So let's get things started. Demon Souls doesn't have as wide of a range to choose from like most of the other games, but that doesn't really matter as the choice for worst area in the game has to go to 5-2, the Swamp of Sorrows. Although I'll give a dishonorable mention to 2-2, the Tunnel City, because nowadays I'd actually say I dislike this area more just due to how mundane it is. It feels like a huge amount of meh. However, I just couldn't not put 5-2 in this spot, no matter how different I tried to be. The everlasting impact that this area has had on my mental state from my initial playthrough of the game will stick with me for absolute years. This place is actualized misery. It is the poison swamp and perhaps the most frustrating one to deal with in the entire series. You're forced to constantly wade your way through muck whilst fighting through waves of annoying enemies. Keep in mind as you're traversing through the level, you are constantly at a pace slower than usual thanks to the nature of the swamp, making encounters much more volatile. Oh, and did I mention, if you try rolling in the swamp, you get punished for it as your character will go through an aggravatingly long animation that has you at the mercy of whatever's around. There's a ring in the remake to help combat this issue, but the process of getting it is decently complicated and most newcomers unfortunately won't find it. And if one of those giant depraved ones see you, then you better clench that ass as it's about to get intense. A bow really helps for picking apart enemies just like a majority of areas in Demon Souls. The poison in this level is about the least of your worries, to be honest. My advice is to just accept that your health will be constantly draining. At least you have a large supply of consumables to help with that. The village portion of this area is kinda cool, but these little depraved ones are deceptively aggressive and can take you out quickly if you get careless. The fact that this area is probably one of the last levels players will go through feels like such a slog, but I would hate it even more if it was placed early on, so I guess it's actually a good thing. Speaking of it being a slog, yeah, this area is long. It's long and only has one shortcut, which is right at the very end. It feels amazing to finally get, but it makes the entire process of getting to it an absolute nightmare. The fact that Miyazaki went on and made this type of area a tradition in the series is just painfully amazing. I know those of us who played Demon Souls as one of the later games in their Souls journey got to this place and were like, I get it's meant to be this oppressive and dejecting area and it did the damn job well, but I just had to place it here. I just had to. It's a cruel level. For Dark Souls 1, the game took a nosedive in quality after you complete Anor Londo and venture on through to the second half. And it's also where I gain a couple of choices for this video. Whilst the first half had infamous levels like the Depths and Blighttown, I still actually found those levels to be interestingly designed, not nearly as bad as I've heard others dog on it for. However, areas like the Demon Ruins, Lost Izalith and the Tomb of the Giants are all just really messy levels from both design and gameplay aspects. The Tomb of the Giants is a near pitch black environment that you're made to navigate through while dealing with some of the trickiest enemies possible. It's easy to get lost, has a bonfire that can also easily be missed, and is quite literally a headache to get through, which is funny as it comes after Pinwheel. As bad as that may sound, the overall lack of design from the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith is just glaringly obvious and can't be overlooked. My choice for Dark Souls 1's worst area will go to the Lost Izalith for this video. Its issues are the same as the Demon Ruins, but in my opinion just on a larger scale. The first half of the level is just asinine, a huge lava lake that covers what the eye can see, but instead of it being something beautiful to admire, it's just plain unappealing to look at. They toned it down in the remaster, but the brightness of the lava in the original was damn near headache inducing. Another note of mention is that the second bonfire here is hidden, making it common for players to just have to run through the entire area to get back to the boss. Hang on, the second bonfire in the Tomb of the Giants and the Demon Ruins were also pretty missable. What the hell was Miyazaki's problem here? There's also the enemy situation. The bottom halves of dragons are just plastered everywhere around the lake, which you don't want to mess around with. It's frankly just hilarious to look at. For a game that had the exceptional enemy placement of areas like the Undead Berg and Anor Londo, to come here and see this mess, it's nothing short of comical. The second half of the area leading up to the Bed of Chaos is nowhere near as atrocious, but it doesn't really feel very impactful either, so it just remains as a bunch of nothing in my head. It's pushed to the side by the devastation beforehand. Enemies are still copy and pasted about like crazy, but these Chaos Eaters are pretty cool. The shortcut back through the Titanite Demon is awesome, and this encounter with Siegmeyer is legendary. Overall though, this level just blows. It's uninteresting from both a design and gameplay standpoint, and it sucks to go through, and your reward for all of this is the fucking bed of chaos. Let's move on, shall we? From an area filled with bright red, boiling hot lava, let's move on to something that's completely the opposite. You should know where I'm heading with this. The worst area from Dark Souls 2, and it was probably the easiest choice in any of these videos I've made thus far, the frigid outskirts. What don't I talk about here? It's potentially the last experience that some players had with the Dark Souls 2 game, since it's the final area in the third DLC, the Crown of the Ivory King, and that's kind of sad. The area begins by getting into a coffin and sliding off the map entirely. A perfect representation of what will soon become the player's mindset after spending a while in the area they're about to head to. Once you get up from the coffin and look around for a bit, you're left thinking, interesting, doesn't seem like there's much to do here. Well, sorry pal, but that's the least of your worries. As you do try and explore the vast emptiness that surrounds you, there'll be blizzards that periodically roll through, blinding players. This makes trying to get through this fucking social experiment very confusing. The disorientation is one thing. The frozen reindeer are another lion's share of the trouble that you'll be up against here, being some of the most endgame type enemies possible. They're aggressive, they're tanky, they're powerful, you know, whatever word you can think to describe them, they're that. It's usually during the snowstorms where they'll seemingly come out of nowhere to attack you, and it makes encounters tough, almost as if they're the ones dictating the rules here. Oh yeah, and it's not uncommon to find yourself fighting against multiple of these reindeer. All of this makes the approach to the boss, which is the only worthwhile thing here, a huge pain in the fucking arsehole. And it only gets worse as the boss you're tasked to fight is Lord and Zalin. I'm not even going to get into why I dislike them. That's some whole other shite that isn't worth the time. But I'll tell you this, they're a fight where you'll probably die at least a few times, which feels absolutely gut-wrenching. Not because of the fact that you were close to killing them or anything like that, but it's because you have to run through this entire area again. There's no shortcut, just use the damn summons and fight through all the bullcrap. Send them home once you get to the fog gate if it suits you. Lore aside, there's really nothing good to talk about concerning this area. I guess it did the job at making me feel like an absolute worthless wretch. Thanks FromSoft, and thanks for also trying to recreate a similar feeling with the consecrated snowfields. Definitely didn't ruin that area for me too. Moving on to Bloodborne, a game that I consider to not really have any bad areas, or at least any areas that compare with some of the previous ones that we've spoken about so far. To me, Bloodborne's areas are dense with interesting and complex design, fascinating enemies and rewarding exploration. One area that certainly lacks in a few of those aspects would have to be Byrgenwerth, which is my choice for the video. It was definitely tough choosing a spot here, and I'd give a dishonorable mention to the Nightmare Frontier for being such a chore to explore through, whilst also introducing me to these terrifying monstrosities, and of course it housing the obnoxious poisonous swamp that just had to be included in the game. It's definitely a tedious area filled with enemies that can be a serious thorn in the sides of players, but the overall layout and visual design of the area is pretty solid in my eyes. I've grown to like it over the years. Plus it has Patches, who's at his most devious this time around. Actually I don't think that helps my case here considering he does this to players. Looping back to Byrgenwerth though, it's not a pest to deal with like the Nightmare Frontier, but time and time again I'm just reminded of how painfully underwhelming it is as an area, which is my main reason for putting it here. Constantly throughout the first half of the game, you're showered with little hints and lore pieces about Byrgenwerth and its significance. The build up to it is fantastic and handled really well. Then you have to take your sweet ass time through the Forbidden Woods, another infamous area in the game. You kill the fucking Nazgul from Lord of the Rings and you finally get to Byrgenwerth and you're faced with a single building. Yep, that's the area. It's minuscule. You probably could have fitted 20 Byrgenwerth sized areas inside the Forbidden Woods. For all the mystery and the lore that came beforehand, you'd expect something a little more, you know, grand I guess. The enemies are certainly intriguing though. These spider fly thingies that can inflict frenzy on you are cool to go up against, although it does house a brain sucker. I absolutely despise these things, but then you take a turn and what the hell is that? Yeah, a one-time appearance from this enemy that I'm sure startled the majority of players who got to this area. After playing through the Chalice dungeons, coming back to see this thing again is hilarious. It's like, okay grandpa, who the hell let you out here? The actual building itself is somewhat interesting, but once again just not enough to satiate the curiosity that befell players leading to this area. The hunter encounter is one of the tougher ones in the game and can be even more challenging than the boss for some reason, but after grabbing a key and seeing Master Willem, that's literally all the area has to offer. You can get through it in 2 minutes, which is just a shame if anything. I don't despise the area, it's just a massive disappointment in my eyes, and I can only dream about what it could have been. Also there's 2 freaking shortcuts here. Why? The frigid outskirts had none! Hey, that wasn't part of the script, we were meant to move on to Dark Souls 3. Oh shit, my bad. When it comes to the final entry in the Dark Souls trilogy, it offers an interesting roster of levels for players to go through. When thinking about which area to choose for this game, to be honest, quite a few sprung to mind. The obvious and most infamous being the Farron Keep, because FromSoft just love their poison swamps. In all honesty, I don't find it to be as egregious as, let's say, 5-2 for example, but it definitely can be a tedious journey. Having to light the 3 flames to progress makes it so players will have to engage quite a bit with the area, which can be annoying for those who aren't keen on Grus and Elder Grus, which I wouldn't blame them for. Another area I thought about giving this spot to would be the Irithyll dungeons, that comes right before the Profane Capital. It's just an obnoxious level with one of the most annoying enemy types in the series, the Jailers. Their gimmick of reducing your health bar is a nightmare, and the fact that you don't even gain the lost health back and have to waste your flasks adds insult to injury. Also, this room is an absolute joke, a prime example of troll software, striking whilst the iron is still hot. But with all that said and done, there was one area that I found so mundane that I almost forgot about it entirely whilst I was choosing for this spot, and that would be the Crucifixion Woods. The placement and just everything about this level screams filler to me. It's put between the Undead Settlement, Cathedral of the Deep and the Farron Keep, all levels that feel much more weighty. They're areas with a lot to do, so the Crucifixion Woods just feels like it's just existing, you know. The thing is, there's actually a decent amount of stuff here, so you do have your fair share of things to do. However, the enemies that inhabit this level are messy to deal with. Firstly, it's your introduction to the giant crabs, who have some of the tankiest and trickiest encounters in the entire game. Never mind in the early game, you're also fighting in open water, where some parts slow you down, possibly making things go from bad to worse. I could leave it at that and I think I'd be justified, because fuck those crabs. But even the other enemies like the dogs are just plain vexing to deal with. And these lycanthropes can be a double-edged sword depending on how you approach them. And the ruins filled with mages can also get really irritating at times. The area isn't bad in my eyes, but it's just so bland and forgettable and adds to the whole, Dark Souls 3 early game being a slog thing so much more. Next up we have Sekiro, and this game, like Bloodborne for me, has no real bad areas. It also has a lot less areas as a whole, which helps in making the ones they do have memorable for players. Now before I go on to my real mention, I'll give a dishonorable mention to the Abandoned Dungeon. It definitely is the worst area in the game, but it'd feel like a cop-out answer if I chose that, since its entire purpose is like a transitional area. It's like the Crucifixion Woods was, but to a much more obvious degree. There's not really much to talk about regarding the Abandoned Dungeon. The enemies are plain as grass, and it harbours the Shichiman Warrior mini-boss, which can absolutely terrorise newcomers. Although I do like Dojun and his twisted questline. Also, the way it actually connects to some of the other areas is pretty cool, and the drop down to the Ashina Depths never fails to wow me. Speaking of which, my choice will go to the Ashina Depths for this video. The level is really split into 2 sections, the Poison Pools and the Misty Forest. The poisonous section is actually the most forgiving of its kind, as due to the nature of Sekiro's mechanics, you're able to run quickly to avoid sticking in the poison long enough for it to actually affect you. You're also able to grapple to vantage points, evading that substance even more. So for once, the poison isn't even an issue. It's more so the enemies. You're not able to get past this portion of the level without going through the Snake Eyes Shirahagi mini-boss, who can prove to be troublesome alongside all the extra backup in the arena. If you've got some neat foresight, then you'll be able to stealthily eliminate all the adds, whilst also being able to give her a death blow. After taking her out and the bosses that come afterwards, you're presented with the forest section, which is an interesting portion of the game, albeit pretty forgettable once completed. And I'd probably attribute that to the reuse of just about every single enemy here. Nothing feels fresh, and you're much more enveloped by the atmosphere and the mystery of what to do, that when you actually do complete your objective, the area just fades away from your mind as you travel to a much more interesting level in Mibu Village. Also, the mini bosses in the forest section are just a bunch of reskins. These fat fuckers are one of the least enjoyable fights in the game, and this headless encounter, I almost flew out my damn chair when I fell down and stumbled upon this on my first playthrough. Of course though, there's the Great Shinobi Miss Noble right at the very end, so that really makes everything else forgivable, right? That brings us all the way to Elden Ring, with really not much to choose from. But just like with Dark Souls 2, the actual choice here is glaringly obvious. Like, I tried looking for something else to pick out, but nothing was even half as bad as this. Not even a dishonorable mention this time round. My spot for the worst area in Elden Ring goes to the Lake of Motherfucking Rot. Death feet, and a poisonous / toxic swamp level. The 3 guarantees of a Soulsborne game. The Lake of Rot is the ultimate fuck you that Miyazaki could have put in this game. It's a massive open pool of Scarlet Rot, one of the most brutal status effects in this game. Unlike poison, which slowly drains away at your health, Scarlet Rot eats through your HP at an alarming rate. The only way to avoid it is by chugging through flasks, using spells to minimize your time in the rot, or to consume preserving boluses, which you can't craft many of anyway. If you want to explore this hellscape, then be prepared for a lot of trial and error to figure your way through. There's also a goddamn dragonkin soldier hidden away near the back, which can be a brutal fight. And once you do make it out through the first section, you get to the Grand Cloister and you need to bob and weave through a horde of Kindred of Rot, because I'll be damned if I'm fighting these shits. The cheek of From Software to also include an ulcerated tree spirit here is crazy. It's a battle that is as hectic as it sounds. Most of us during it were probably like, "Bro, I don't know what the fuck to do! I don't know what to do!" Honestly, just everything about this area sucks in the worst ways possible, and I really don't think you can argue a spot out of the worst for this game. I'm pretty sure Miyazaki's goal with this area was to crown it the absolute worst toxic swamp in the series. It just feels too extra with all the nonsense it has. Like, there was zero need to have 2 boss fights here. But even after saying all that, I still don't think it tops some of the worst areas from the earlier games though. Those were beyond awful. At least with the Lake of Rot, you can absolutely beeline it to the end pretty easily without missing much of importance. The things we do for you, Rani. And with all that done, we are at the end of the video. If you've made it through to this point, then thank you so much for watching. It's never a dull moment when you have levels like these to talk about. Be sure to let me know your thoughts and drop a comment letting us know which areas you despise or like the least from each game. I'll be there to read them. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to drop a like and think about subscribing to the channel to help out the cause. The recent support through the last month has been great and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. Next week, to complete this little trilogy, I'll be covering what I believe to be the hardest area from each game. So look forward to that one. Have a great day everybody, thanks for watching and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace!